SpaceX Dragon gives ISS a boost. What really happened? B-roll sweeping shot of Earth from orbit, ISS slowly crossing the frame. Dramatic but calm music building. On September 3, 2025, something unusual happened aboard the International Space Station. For the first time, a SpaceX Dragon cargo spacecraft fired its engines to push the entire 400-ton station higher into orbit. It wasn't a minor tweak. It was a real test of whether private spacecraft can take over one of the most important jobs in spaceflight, keeping the ISS alive. Part 1. Why the station needs a boost. Here's the thing. The space station doesn't just float up there forever. Even at 250 miles above Earth, the thin upper atmosphere is constantly dragging it down, like air resistance on a car. Over time, that drag pulls the station closer to Earth. If nobody did anything, the ISS would eventually re-enter the atmosphere and burn up. That's why reboosts are critical. They're basically orbital pit stops. Powerful engines fire to push the station into a slightly higher orbit, buying it more time in space. Up until now, reboosts have been almost entirely the job of Russian Progress cargo ships. For decades, they've been the workhorses, nudging the station back up. But with international politics tense and the ISS nearing the end of its life, NASA and its partners are testing new ways to keep the station running. Part 2. Enter SpaceX Dragon. That's where SpaceX comes in. On September 3rd, the Dragon cargo spacecraft that launched on August 28th docked to the forward port of the ISS's Harmony module. 5 days later, engineers on the ground sent a command: fire Dragon's thrusters. The burn lasted less than 2 minutes, just 95 seconds. But it was enough to raise the station's orbit by about half a mile. Now, half a mile might not sound like much when you're thinking about Earth-scale distances, but in orbital mechanics, it's significant. This wasn't just about altitude, it was a proof of concept. Could a private spacecraft safely handle a job that's been done exclusively by Russian hardware for decades? This test says yes. Part 3. Why this test matters. Here's why this matters. The ISS is a partnership between the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. But the geopolitical landscape has shifted. NASA knows it can't rely on progress forever. If Dragon can take over reboost, it adds redundancy, flexibility, and security. It also signals a bigger shift. Commercial spacecraft are no longer just delivering supplies or ferrying astronauts. They're becoming part of the station's long-term survival system. That's a big leap in responsibility. Part 4. Life on the station during the reboost. So, what was life like for the 7 astronauts and cosmonauts aboard during this test? Pretty normal, surprisingly. The crew of Expedition 73 carried on with their daily routines. They were working on science experiments, maintaining the station, and even hosting live calls with students back on Earth. One experiment, called Cardio Breath, is studying how microgravity affects breathing and cardiovascular function. Another focused on muscle health and space agriculture. All of these investigations help prepare for longer missions to the Moon and Mars. During the reboost itself, the crew barely noticed a thing. The burn was so gentle that inside the station, it was almost like riding an elevator that smoothly sped up. The real work was happening in the numbers, tracking how the orbit shifted, analyzing whether Dragon's engines delivered the expected push. Part 5. A conversation with Earth. One of the highlights of the week wasn't the reboost at all. It was a live Q&A session with students back on Earth. NASA loves connecting classrooms with astronauts in orbit, And the crew of Expedition 73 answered everything from "What do you eat in space?" to "What's the hardest part of being away from your family?" Moments like this remind us that the ISS isn't just a lab. It's also a bridge between Earth and space, between today's scientists and tomorrow's explorers. Part 6. What comes next? The Dragon spacecraft that performed the reboost is still docked to the station. It's scheduled to stay until late December, serving as both a storage unit and a lifeline. It delivered more than 6,000 pounds of supplies, experiments, and hardware. Before it leaves, it'll be loaded with trash and old equipment to safely burn up in Earth's atmosphere. This isn't the last time Dragon might be asked to fire its thrusters. If NASA deems the test a success, we could see future missions take on bigger reboost roles. Over time, that could mean progress is no longer the sole guardian of the ISS orbit. Part 7. The bigger picture. Step back for a moment. The ISS is over 20 years old. It's scheduled to operate at least through 2030, maybe longer, but the future of human spaceflight is already shifting toward commercial stations and deeper space missions. What this Dragon reboost really shows is that